Hey guys, welcome back to Pod Local. I have a special guest today. This is actually a really special podcast. So I have with me Bert Alcorn. If you recognize the last name, this is my brother. So Bert, go ahead and say hi and say a little bit about yourself here.
Hey everyone. Hey Tim. Thanks for having me on. This is super fun to be on. Like Tim said, my name is Bert. My wife Sherry and I, we have 3 kiddos. And we live in Ventura, which is a little beach town about an hour north of Los Angeles, and have been living in this area for the last 10 years or so. Absolutely love it. My wife and I started a church about 5 years ago, and have been loving, leading, and serving this community that we're in right here. And so we talked right before the recording, the irony that I am not actually local, but I'm from the Bay Area. So I hearken from Milpitas, just like Tim, and have a deep affection for the Bay Area and all the friends and family we left behind.
That's awesome. So the reason why I wanted to bring you on is because, well, for one, you're overall a very wise person. And there's a lot of just kind of chaos, whether it's socially, mentally, or, one of the big cases that I want to talk about here is in religion. So there are a lot of people who are really upset, that the church is closed. People from my own church are upset. People from around the Bay Area are upset. Kind of everyone's upset. And you, when we talked last, your church is actually kind of like thriving through this. And it's kind of ushered in a new era that, I'm going to let you explain it, because you could explain it better than I can. But so you're the pastor of a church that you planted down in Ventura. So how has your church kind of adapted to basically a ban on gatherings?
Well, I promise I will answer your question, but could I backstep just a little bit?
Absolutely.
To bring a bit of context for even how we as a local leadership team would interpret and process through some of the changes that we've all had to process through in 2020. And I credit this to a friend of mine, a mentor, kind of draws on a whiteboard. I know this is a podcast, so this is the wrong medium, but on a whiteboard like a kind of a baseball diamond. And he will kind of go, right? First base is theology. Second base is philosophy. Third base is practice, and fourth base is leaders. And he'll go through and unpack them. Theology is what we believe about God. Philosophy is how do we then view the world and interpret that in our context. Practice is the things we actually do, and leaders are people who are running this engine. And what he would say is we get into trouble when we go backwards around the bases. So when we start at home plate, we start at home plate anyway, but when you go to third base first and you talk practice, and then you go talk philosophy, and then you talk theology. And in our particular context as a local church, we find that we make the best decisions when we actually start with what do we believe about God? What do we believe about Jesus? What do we believe about the church? And then what are the decisions we make after those things? And so right up top, one of the things that we've had to do in our local city and our local context, but with also friends as well, is to immediately correct the wrong thinking that the church is somehow closed because we can't gather the same way we used to. So start with theology. What do we believe about God? Do we believe he's more or less powerful than a global pandemic? What do we believe about the church? Do we believe the church is the Sunday gathering, or is that one practice that the church has had for part of its history? And for us, we would say the church has never closed. It never can, it never will be closed. Jesus opened the doors to his church, and he's the one who gets to close the doors on his church. Nobody else, not a pandemic, not government regulation, not anything. Now, does that require some interpretation? Absolutely. Does it challenge a model that we've maybe been handed, or maybe we are accustomed to or used to? 100%. But that has to go after what do we believe about God? And what do we believe about the church? Has the church closed? Absolutely not. Are we having to change practice and philosophy? Yes, absolutely. And so for us, as we've kind of looked through that lens, we know that we have to change and adapt with culture. And that means holding on with a closed fist, the things we believe about God, the things we believe about Holy Scripture, and not moving on those, the gospel message of Jesus Christ, but also being really open-handed with methods and methodology. And often the resistance and the conflict, at least inside the church, comes when Christians, those who would call themselves Christians, hold really close and close-handed methods and methodology, which just over 2,000 years of church history has changed. It has necessarily changed to meet every time, every moment, every culture. And that's one of the things I actually love about the church is it's beautifully resilient to culture, beautifully resilient to political persuasion. I mean, the church has thrived and flourished under communist China and persecution and some of the most like liberalized, open, democratic governments that we've seen, and everywhere in between. And I would also say maybe one more addendum to that is actually if we look in 2,000 some odd years of church history, the church has actually thrived when it's not been in power. And the church has actually thrived when it's been the object of persecution or social ostracization or anything like that. And the church has actually gotten itself into trouble when they're the ones that are in power, that they're the majority, that they have the say, and they're wielding authority over others. So for us, that's all to say, we've actually looked at 2020 with great tenderness and gentleness for the people who are hurting, who have been affected by this either economically with job loss or an actual sickness, and people we know who've had to struggle through COVID and all of that. We've actually looked at this year quite opportunistically and trying to answer the question, like, how might God have us live differently? Is there a different version of the church that we could step into? Are there different habits and practices and patterns in our lives that we can embrace that actually help us come out of this season stronger, not weaker? More thriving, not just surviving, and more mature, not immature. And so for us, that's all context to say, like, this has been a hard year. Yes, it's been chaotic and confusing and crazy, but we've also tried to look at, like, what can we do and how can we respond to a God that we believe in is all powerful and loves to take the hard moments in our life and shape them for good? How can we actually respond in a way that's better? And then we actually come out of the year stronger and better, not in spite of, but because of some of the hard things we've had to walk through. So to your question earlier, we have totally upended our church and what it looks like and the format and the method while holding close-handedly to the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have had to be open-handed with methods around gathering, methods around communication, methods around in-person and digital and all of those different things. And for us, it was scary and crazy until the moment we said, God, we want to listen to the things that you're doing. And we want to be really open-handed with things we should be open-handed with, like how we gather, which has changed frequently and is quite different depending on your denominational heritage as well. And so it's silly for us to hold on to those because just 1 or 2 or 300 years before, let alone thousands of years before, these things have had to look different to meet the moment of culture.
You know, there is a few really interesting points that aren't really talked about a lot that you just brought up. One of them, I think the one that really stuck out the most to me was the church has actually thrived when it has been not in power, and the church has actually gotten in trouble when it has been in power. That's really interesting because if you look back, it's actually true. But you know, when it comes to people kind of upset that they can't gather, I think it's mostly people are kind of missing the community aspect of things. And, you know, they're missing seeing their church family on a Sunday morning, and it's one more thing that's kind of thrown off from this weird year. But kind of expanding on that point a little bit, this year has been... me and a friend of mine on another podcast were kind of talking about this. It's been a like massive amount of incremental changes. And so as soon as you get used to one change, then you have another one, and then you have another one, and then you have another one. And, you know, for the longest time, no matter where you were in life, no matter what you were doing, what your job situation was, what your relationship status was, you always had that Sunday morning where you went and you had that bit of normalcy. And now that one bit of normalcy is no longer there. And so it's kind of one more kind of jackknife thrown into 2020. And I think it's kind of just hitting people a little bit harder right now. But, you know, you have a very interesting point of view, which is yes, one aspect of church is different, but everything else is still the same. The church, as you said, is not closed, because that's one thing that I don't know if you've been hearing it, but I've been hearing it a lot. Is, oh my gosh, church is closed. The government canceled church. But this pandemic, if it were to happen in any year, this is like kind of the year for it to happen, because we have stuff like Zoom. We have live streaming to YouTube. Anyone with a laptop can live stream anything to YouTube, and then your entire community can gather around a computer and have church digitally. Can you imagine if this happened in the year 2000? That'd
be pretty wild.
I mean,
yeah.
then I would be a little bit worried. But we have technology. So you explained to me last time we talked, kind of, you're kind of embracing the church in your home type thing, and your home is now your church, and that is just so fascinating to me, because that's not really something I've seen a church do before. Is do like a church, obviously everyone live streaming, the most likely they're watching the service from their house, but you're kind of like embracing that, like, no, the house is your church, and that is just super fascinating to me. So not only as a pastor are you kind of dealing with not being able to gather on a Sunday morning, but I feel like you and every pastor is facing another challenge that they probably did not foresee, which is just this extreme civil rights movement, and social unrest and all of that. And I want to know kind of what your take is on everything that's happened this year.
Before I do, can I even engage with some of what you're saying a little bit?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I think the thing to be challenged is, as it pertains to church, this is my context. I don't know if it applies to everyone who's listening, but this is the context I'm in. And so if this is applicable to you, that's awesome. But I think that the thing to be challenged is this idea that somehow church is Sunday morning, right? But what you're saying about people's desire for incarnational, in-person community is so vital. It's how we were made for relationships. God's a relational God. Out of relationship came the universe, And even the language in Genesis 1 is, let us make man in our own image. Who's God's talking to? He's talking about the Trinity. He has eternal community before he creates humanity in the world and everything in it. And so we're born for relationship. It's one of the ways we mirror, actually, like our Creator God. And so that is a huge thing to be grabbing a hold of. And so I think those who follow Jesus have a huge opportunity to come back to real community, not sitting in a pew for 60 to 90 minutes. That's not community. And I think those who follow Jesus have a real opportunity to come back to like a truer sense of doing life with one another, of actually sharing life. And even as you talk about church in the home, as the home, I mean, as you read through the Gospels, Jesus is either on his way to, at, or leaving a meal. And there's something sacred and beautiful about the table. And so to center the church in the home is to center the church around the table, and to say there's something that happens, something spiritual happens around a meal when we are sharing a meal and sharing life together. And so honestly, our journey as a local church is just trying to recapture some of what we see when we see in the New Testament, but not just to be those people who say, oh, we want to be like the early church. Yeah, everyone does, but nobody actually wants to be. Have you read about the persecution that happens? No one actually wants that, but we're trying to look and see what the Holy Spirit did in the early church, and to put it through our context of 2020. And like you said, what a blessing that this pandemic happened in 2020 and not the year 2000, when we're able to be so connected with one another. Now, there's a whole different conversation about being overconnected that we won't have to get into, but I think it is a gift and a tool to the church to lead from the front and being innovative, and lead from the front and trying to be a hopeful, non-anxious presence in our time, in our place. And I think that carries over to the conversations you're alluding to around racial justice or the disenfranchised or marginalized or whatever. Once again, another conversation the church should be at the forefront of, like it was in the first century. The church was oriented radically around caring for the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, the sojourner in the Old and the New Testament. And I believe it's a prophetic voice we've lost that we have the opportunity to regain, not by having a hot take. I have no hot takes for you today. That's not my personality at all. But
you don't have a little soundbite for me?
Yeah, I got nothing like that. But to simply be present with people, to be amazing, empathetic listeners, and to be out front caring for, protecting, and guarding those who cannot speak up for themselves, or those who have been marginalized historically by systems. And so I'm not a boogeyman where there's a demon behind every system, where every system has to be uprooted and upended. But I am for saying, like, God values humanity, all of human life. And that's why I think Christians have historically had a pro-life position on life, to say if life reflects our maker, then from womb to tomb, we have to be for pro-life, which is not just an abortion, women's rights issue. It is a whole life issue, that from womb to tomb, we care about each and every person because they are image bearers of God. And so as we're talking about abortion, as we're talking about the marginalized, the oppressed, those who have been systematically kept down in different times, in different places, and in different cultures, it is the role of Christians to care for all of those people who cannot speak for themselves. And so pastorally, how I step into that with our community is so nuanced and complex based on whatever the conversation of the day happens to be. And you're right, this incremental change or conversations that are happening are changing daily and weekly. And I think one of the things that as those who follow Jesus, and maybe those who don't can even learn some of this as well, is to just become resilient, faithful to your core convictions, and to live a vibrant life regardless of the circumstances. Now, through the lens of Jesus and Scripture, I would say that comes from life with Jesus, that as we go through life, we have the invitation and the opportunity to become more resilient disciples, which just means apprentices. It just means being with and becoming like our master, Jesus. To be resilient apprentices who are faithful in the face of cultural coercion, other voices trying to convince us to live differently, and who live a vibrant life in the Spirit, empowered by the Holy Spirit. And I think for us, that allows us to persevere and travail any sort of conversations that are happening. No matter, if they're important today and not important tomorrow, or have lasting impact. I think that's some of how we lead into these conversations. The church should be on the forefront of caring for those who have been oppressed, marginalized. They should be amazing listeners. They should be the best empathizers. And they should be on the forefront of some of these conversations, giving platform to people who may not have a voice.
That is, that's very interesting. And I'm not going to go down this road too much because I don't want to make it seem like I'm trash talking anyone or anything, but it's just not, that's not a perspective I see over here, often at all. Especially with just this particular issue. It's just not really a perspective I see. And so it's really eye-opening actually to get kind of your perspective on this, because, it's not just, we should be, and it's, let me kind of step back. It's not that it would be a good idea if we were at the forefront of this. It's like we should be. And that's kind of what, the church was called to do. We were called to do. We should be at the forefront because like you said, we should be supporting and a voice for the marginalized and the oppressed. And, you saying that is just kind of a good reminder that we should definitely just kind of be at the forefront of that. And sorry, I'm just kind of, almost like a little bit speechless. And it's just because that's not a perspective that I hear, every day. It's, there's a, there's some churches that are just kind of quiet on this issue, and some that are kind of like actively trying to avoid talking about it or dealing with it. And then you have some around here that there's a few who are actively just like, hey, you're loved, you're here, and if there's anything we can do to help, then just please tell us, let us know. And probably a lot of the listeners here know I personally work at a church, and I've been trying to facilitate that at my church, and trying to say like, hey, like, what can we do to help, like, and bringing it up in meetings and all that, and talking to certain people and all that. But that's
think,
yeah, go for it.
I'm talking to myself, right? So I'm the worst at this, just like we all can be at times. I think one of the reasons is these kind of conversations can be so difficult is because, and like I said, I'm a perpetrator of this as well, is those who follow Jesus have a tendency, or at least in the last like 50 to 100 years here in America, I've had a tendency to buy into political platforms whole scale, the entire thing. And I'm not a politician. I have no intent for running. That is not my thing at all. And there are people much smarter and wiser around the political world. But I think as mainly a critique and a challenge for Christians is we have a tendency to buy in, maybe because one or two issues we really prefer or whatever. And as we just look at Scripture and the historic Christian Orthodox Church, the things the church holds really important have never and will never neatly fit into any one political party, right? And so on one hand, you have a commitment to seeing the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed be taken care of, and the ethic of a historic Christian view of sexuality together. One of those seems oppressively conservative, one of them seems oppressively liberal. And at the same time, this hospitality for the alien, the sojourner, alongside like a commitment to honoring all of life. And at the same time, the church has had a historic conviction around enemy love and forgiveness, which no side wants to claim that one. Every side likes to be kind of off. And so all of those things together make for it really hard for a Christian to whole-scale adopt a Republican Party platform or whole-scale adopt a Democratic Party platform. Now, is it wrong for Christians to be in political parties? Not inherently. I think there's a whole lot of nuance and complexity and issues one has to sort through if that's the decision you make, because there can be good done inside a political party. You can be agents of change. But it is very difficult because as a Jesus follower, if you want to follow the Bible, it will put you at odds with both the left and the right. And it makes these conversations very difficult if we cannot at least own the bias that we bring to the table. No one will ever be unbiased. This conversation around biased news, around fake news, around where you get your media, like this is a very complex issue because we have this idealized version of neutrality that somehow there is a true neutral out there, and that is just simply a farce. It doesn't exist. But the best thing we can do, and this is what I got taught at Bible college day one, is you all have a bias. Learn to see it, learn to own it, and understand that's how you will view the text of Scripture. That's how you will view these conversations. And if you know what it is and you can identify it, then you can start to deconstruct the bias, or you can better empathize with someone who thinks or has a felt experience that is different from you. And often our problem, and I'll speak to Christians here, our problem is we do not do a good job knowing or owning our own bias that we bring. And so we simply adopt whole party platforms, and then it's where you can't have conversation because you're siloed off and things are getting more polarized than ever before, and we just have nowhere to go after that. But if we can simply say like, hey, here's my background, here's my context, here's my felt experience, this is what I bring to the table when I talk about racial equality, or when I talk about income inequality, or when I talk about whatever your topic is that you want to talk about, if you can know and own your bias and then truly listen to someone else with a different felt experience, I believe that goes miles. And I believe it's one of the areas that Christians can regain their prophetic voice in our time and our place, is to be empathetic, aggressive active listeners, and to aggressively see our own bias that we bring to the table and not assume everyone who thinks differently than us is wrong. So I know that was multiple thoughts jumbled all in one, but I even want to acknowledge, like, yeah, this is a really hard conversation, or a set of 1,000 hard conversations to enter into, made harder by the fact that we get our news and our information from these echo chambers that just reaffirm what we think. And if we don't like them, we cancel them, we cut them out, and continue to be reinforced. And we are not faced with the reality that, look, I am not right all the time. You are not right all the time. We think we are. But until there's someone there telling us, hey, you're not right all the time, and here's some other news to add into the pool of meaning, we just don't get anywhere.
Yeah, when it comes to like you said, there's a lot of very complex things that you just said. And frankly, I feel like with active listening, being true active listeners, I feel like we could talk for a couple hours just about that and different strategies on that. But one thing is, it is very hard to stay updated on the news without getting some sort of bias these days. And it's also very hard to just figure out, like, where should you get your news? Like, you listen to one.
Hold on. You will get biased no matter what. You will get biased no matter what. So just disavow the thought that you're going to somehow get unbiased news somewhere. And even if there was unbiased news, no one would want to read that ticker sheet of unbiased just facts of what's happening in the Senate that day. Like, no one's actually going to read that. There's always some level of commentary about what's happening. So just simply, like, disavow the reality that you're going to get unbiased news and just own the bias and just know, okay, if I'm like getting most of my news from, let's say, Fox News or the Wall Street Journal or something like that, I know they're going to lean right. So maybe just to be a well-rounded person, I should read, just as much New York Times as I do Fox News, or just as much MSNBC as I get Wall Street Journal. And the further out in those extremes, the further you have to discipline yourself to read widely, or else you get caught in that echo chamber. And so there's no such thing as unbiased news. It is not out there. Maybe AP or Reuters can be somewhere in there, but that's very dry and is still going to be commentary to some degree on news. And especially as we get out into more opinion, primetime or website or podcast or whatever it is, just know there's no such thing as no bias. And just know whatever your outlet is, it does have a bias. And I don't know if that's wrong. We all bring our life experience to anything that we do. We don't have robots reporting the news, right? We have humans reporting the news, which means there's life experience, there's background, there's family of origin, there's framework, there's how we see the world, there's sexuality, there's economic, there's religious background, all in that one reporter who's writing for whatever website you prefer. And that all comes to bear on every story they write. And so the best thing we can do is just learn to spot it and try to be as well-rounded as possible.
It's actually interesting that you went into that because I want to know from your perspective, if you were walking to go get some coffee and someone just happened to stop you on the street and be like, hey, how do I navigate through what's going on right now? Like, give me a summary of how do I navigate through this pandemic, all this civil unrest, the fact that I can't see my family on the holidays, the fact that it feels like the news that I watch is being demonized as fake news, and all of this. Just how do I navigate through all of this? You kind of answered the part about the news and where you get your news from, but kind of since you touched on that, just kind of go through the rest. Like, how would you just, nothing about this person, you don't even know their name, but what would you kind of say to this person? And I know you're just like a million things, but just do your best to kind of sum it up. Like, this person, you could tell they're on their way somewhere.
Man, that's a really, I don't know if I would have a good answer. I think the first thing I would say is, when can we get coffee and talk about this? Because this will not be solved in a 10-second soundbite as you're driving along the car. So that aside, say we take it another step further and we're able to sit down over coffee or over a Zoom or a phone call or whatever. And I'm going to expose my bias here. My answer to that is going to be seeing the world through a biblical lens. It's going to be seeing the world through the life, person, teaching, death, resurrection of Jesus and how he changes everything. And so to that end, I will say how I have tried to answer that question for my local community, my church here, is it's been adopting a really ancient practice called a rule of life. And that's basically rule. We don't like those words. We don't like words like rules or disciplines or whatever, but it's simply like the word rule comes from this Latin word that just means trellis. So think of wine. Think of grapes that grow in a vine. They have to grow in a trellis to be healthy. In much the same way, many of the early church and the historic church has assumed we need some sort of structure to support our life and discipleship. Or else, what happens with a vine if it has no trellis? It grows along the ground, it gets eaten by animals, it kind of deforms, and there's dead branches. It's not healthy, right? The healthiest vines have trellises propping them up. And that's where this ancient practice in the church, a rule of life, has come, where it's a set of rhythms or schedules or practices to just realign our minds, our hearts, and our schedules to the way of Jesus. And so how we've answered this question for our church is to say, hey, during COVID, we're adopting a community rule of life. And it's 8 simple practices. It sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's 8 simple practices to help persevere and become resilient during these seasons. And so it's anywhere from spiritual practices like Sabbath and church on Sundays, practicing regular gratitude, practicing regular generosity, time in scripture before your phone or anything like that, all the way till like non-spiritual practices. Like we say, parent your phone is one of the phrases we have around here. And so it's, how do you parent your kids? I mean, if you have kids that are growing up, they don't sleep in the same room as you. They usually go to bed before you. They wake up after you. You have rules for when you are with them and for things they can do. In the same way, parent this, parent your phone, parent the thing that has become like our extra limb around us. And so it's 8 practices basically to help create a framework for thriving and success in your life through the lens of Jesus, that kind of success. One of those, which I touched on a little bit, was to be careful about your intake of news and your escapist behaviors. And so it's to, literally very practical here. I would say if you're struggling with the news thing, I would say 1, read widely, and 2, read less often than you are. You don't need to be updated to things every hour on the hour. Pick 1 or 2 times a day to read and to curate what you're reading. Don't just scroll Facebook. That's not news. Like open up the New York Times, open up NBC, CNN, Fox News, whatever your thing is, discipline yourself to read widely and to have set times where you actually read what's going on. So curate the news that's coming in. And monitor your escapist behaviors, anywhere from alcohol to Netflix and anything in between. Like, what are the things that you are going to prone to escape the worries of life? Chances are those are not providing actual real rest to you. They're just delaying the inevitable anxiety that's coming. So for us, how I would answer that would be to like set a set of rhythms and practices in your life that do not waver with circumstances, but something that you could actually build your life upon, that makes you a bit more resilient in times of crisis.
That's a good kind of universal answer for kind of dealing with any sort of abnormality, in life. Kind of like your rock, your cornerstone type of thing, and then kind of building off that. I know I kind of tried to set you up for a short answer there, but there is no short answer to what's kind of going on right now. So kind of moving to a somewhat different topic, but kind of somewhat of the same. So churches have been churches around here, they've been talking about the election more than I can ever remember a church talking about an election ever. And I think I have my theory on why, because to me it seems kind of obvious on why this one is a little bit more traumatic than past ones. Traumatic, or that's not the right word. Prevalent in society, I guess.
Consequential.
Yeah, consequential. There you go. That's a good word. But from your point of view, why would you say that this is being talked about in church more than past elections, in my memory, have been brought up in church?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know if I'll have a great answer for. But first, can I say, like, what a privilege it is to engage in the political process? Like, what an honor it is to live in America in the 21st century and not Saudi Arabia 50 years ago. You know, like,
Yeah.
what a privilege it is to engage in the political and democratic process. So I'm very much not like Christians should go put their head under sand or anything like that. It is an honor, and I think it's a responsibility we should steward really wisely and godly. Why are churches talking about it more than ever? I don't know. I think that's maybe two sides of the same coin. Maybe there's a positive side of like, maybe there are churches, pastors who are out there legitimately trying to equip, not telling people what to vote for, but how to vote. Maybe giving them a biblical framework for how to see the world around us, a passion for the poor, the marginalized, the hurting in our community, a conviction around certain values or whatever. Like maybe that's happening, and I think that's the positive side of things. Like I think we should all be very much equipped to go into the cultural sphere, whatever that sphere looks like. 21st century America, churches should be equipping people to engage culture well. Now the dark side to that is when churches might become like political party platforms or advocating for a certain political candidate or a certain political cause at the expense of the gospel. That's really dangerous territory, and that's maybe the negative side of that same coin. Why are more churches talking about it? I mean, there's probably a mix of a number of things. I think the election of President Donald Trump has made for some strange and interesting conversation and has taken what has maybe been relegated to political nerdiness to the forefront. Like I can't open my news app without reading something about President Trump. And, you know, as much as I think President Obama was just as much, if not more, a consequential president in our time and our place, it's not the same. And I think there's a mixture of politics and news and entertainment that's all intertwined in maybe a deeply unhealthy way, but it's come into the public consciousness in a way that at least I've never really experienced before. And so to that end, I mean, as a church leader, those kind of things can't go unaddressed. Like you got to talk, like churches cannot afford to like just sit on the sidelines, put their head in the sand and just go, la, 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 the Bible says. Like that's just not, churches can't do that. You have to engage well and wisely and wholly, set apart in the culture that you are in. And even, I mean, there's a great story. I taught through the book of Daniel earlier this year, and it's profound because we planned that series before COVID, and Daniel's all around being in exile and living in a home that's not your home. And
I listened
one
to
of the precursors. One of the precursors to the book of Daniel is this prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament. And one of the things God tells Jeremiah to tell the Israelite people, who are in slavery, by the way. They're in exile and they're in literal slavery in a country that they've been carried off to the empire of their day, Babylon. And God tells the Israelite people to seek the welfare of the city they're in, to literally build houses, marry people, seek the welfare of the city they're in. And at the same time, hold that intention with like, be distinct, be different, live a different way, proclaim a different way with your life, to literally be a community of countercultural promise to the world around them. And I think in the same way, churches ought to, and many are engaging well, that we are to be set apart, we are to be holy, and holy, by the way, is not a moral word in scripture, it's like it's a distinctive word. So it's not, I'm better than you, it's I'm different than you. That's what that word holy means. And so we're supposed to be set apart and different than the world, but also engage well, and not just engage well, but seek the welfare of the place that we are in. And that ought to be the responsibility of the church. And maybe what we're feeling is like we're having to rebuild that muscle that's atrophied a little bit. And maybe some of us are doing it well and some of us are not doing it well. And maybe we're stumbling along. And I think grace for each other goes a long way in this conversation. But I think that the church is in real danger when we look to one party or one candidate as our hope and our savior. And I'm talking to the left and the right. We cannot see anyone except Jesus as our hope and our savior. And so we have to look at the world with this eschatological hope, this hope in the end that Jesus is the one who makes everything right, not your preferred political candidate. And as Christians, if we can look at the world like that, it frees us up to engage so much differently, because we're not too upset, we're not too distraught, we're not too bitter about how things go, and we're not too excited about how things go, because we know whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I don't know if that's great theology to say, but we can't be too excited or too upset about the way any election goes or anything goes, because we know this is not our ultimate home, and we cannot have our hope all wrapped up into whatever political candidate is saying or doing at any given time, whatever President Trump is tweeting at any given time, whatever moves Joe Biden may make at any given time. Like, we just cannot be caught up in that. And it's okay to be engaged. That's so good. But when our hope is there, it's evident in your life, and that becomes ugly and unappealing to the world around us. How are we supposed to be any different, let alone a compelling community, if we look like everybody else? So what if the church really found its hope in Jesus and not politics? I think it would become a compelling vision for people who are not a part of the church, for people who don't know Jesus. And I just don't know if we've been offering the best picture so far. But I think there is real opportunity in these moments of change and these moments of reframing and having to reimagine everything. I believe there's real opportunity for the church to step in and to be a compelling community that lives out something different.
Well, that's an important point that you made, because especially, well, okay, I've never seen, people so politically divided in my lifetime. I know my lifetime is short compared to especially like the people in office right now, but I've never seen people so divided, and people are scared. People were scared that Donald Trump would get reelected. People were scared that Joe Biden would get elected. People are legitimately frightened. And I feel like that's an important part for a lot of people. So people can kind of look towards the church as their beacon of hope and strength and life, instead of looking at politics and how our government runs. And a lot of people in church already do this, but I think you said that this is a good opportunity for the church. And I think that is completely spot on, because, when people lose their faith in the government and maybe, their life, let's say your average person doesn't go to church, and they say, all right, well, if Joe Biden wins, then my taxes are going to be raised and I don't know what I'm going to do. Or if Donald Trump wins, then, something else will happen and I don't know what I'm going to do. But this is kind of an opportunity for the church to be like, hey, whoever is in power is going to be in power. Your faith, your hope should be in God. And this is a good opportunity for the church to kind of spread that word and give a new beacon of hope for everyone. And yeah, that is completely spot on. Kind of going back, I mean, it sounds like me and you were on the same page. You just said it a lot more elegantly than I could about why this is kind of being talked about in churches a lot more than previous elections. And for me, it kind of goes back to like people are legitimately scared. And like you said, it would be foolish to not address this.
People are scared, and and that's legitimate. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think if you're living in America in 2020 in any kind of suburban context, if you make over 30 or 40K, you objectively have no reason to be scared. Like, it's literally the best humanity has had it in a really long time, right? So just put that out there. People are scared, but people are more connected than ever. And not just to friends, to family, but to like news and the happenings. Like 100 years ago, you would have no idea of the ins and outs of whatever the heck was going on in Washington, D.C. Maybe you read a newspaper, maybe you got some bulletin or something like that. And so our human minds, our bodies are not made for the onslaught of 24/7 cable news, but yet that's what we ingest. That's what we feed ourselves. And so we get into a panic because we're suddenly exposed to all of this bad news in the world that we would have never been aware of before, not even 100 years ago, like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You have no idea what was happening on the other side of the world 20, 30 years ago. But now we know, and it's affecting us at a deep emotional level and a psychological level every single day. And so I think not only they're scared, but I mean, people are exposed to more than they have ever been exposed to. And we have no framework and filter for how to deal with all of this stuff.
So on that point, there's not a whole lot of getting away of being constantly updated unless you do what you said, which is parent your phone, where you literally have, your phone is in a different room or turned off or something. Do you think that it's better to be not informed and that sounds negative when I say not informed, but do you think it's better to kind of just like not worry about everything that's going on, across the world, or do you think it's kind of better to be informed and know what's happening everywhere, and to know like that thing that happened in China, that thing that happened in Japan or the Philippines or Australia, and I'm talking from like a biblical and pastoral point of view, but also just as a person, like as human biology, mentally, like which one do you think actually has more positives than negatives? And that's a hard question that you might not know. I definitely don't know.
No, I definitely know. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Let's
and
hear
the
it.
word you use, underinformed, that's fine. It's better to be not informed than to be informed.
Interesting.
I mean, like we've now had about 2 or 3 decades of the internet to prove that we as humans do not do well with being overconnected. We do not have this. We have not built the skill set to deal with it. Now, do I think it's a black and white thing? No, absolutely not. It's probably more of a spectrum. And so on the scale or on the spectrum between, being addicted to Twitter, Facebook, your news app, and then being totally aloof, both are probably not great, right? But if here's the center, if I were to point you in one direction, I would say for most people I talk to, I usually have to point you back to being less connected. Very rarely do I come across someone and be like, oh, you should actually like read the news sometime. More often than not, our issue is we intake way too much of that stuff. And so I actually do think it's helpful to be less connected and to know like, whoever is watching, listening to this, like the world will go on if you miss a day of news. Like, isn't that amazing that the world goes on without you? Isn't that crazy?
What an interesting thought. That's a very controversial thing you just said.
Take a day away. Turn off your phone for a day. Like the world keeps on spinning. If you don't log into your Instagram will still be there when you want it. If you take a week away with your family and leave all your electronics at home, I know that sounds crazy, but like the world keeps going. And those electronics will be there when you want them. And I think like the thing you mentioned earlier is like, actually, we do have a choice in how we, like literally it is a binary choice of, are you the boss of this or is this the boss of you? And that's not a spectrum. That is a choice. Because if you say, well, I have to check in, I have to look at this email, or I have to start my day looking at my phone and end my day looking at my phone, then it's like, well, okay, you're the slave and your phone's the master then. Mm-hmm. And that's not how humans thrive. That is not the way it should be. But if we set some parameters, even really basic ones, then suddenly this is the slave. This works for you. You don't work for this. And this is like I don't mean to go off on this weird tangent, but I think so many technology companies want us to be convinced that we are a slave to this and we have to do what it says with the onslaught of notifications this, notifications that. Like, no. You are not a slave to your phone. Your phone is a slave to you. Use it as a tool. Don't let yourself be used by it. So I actually believe we do have a choice. And for most people that are watching or listening, my advice to you would be to consume less. Consume less. Consume less entertainment. Consume less social media. Consume less news. I promise you. You can email it to me if this goes awry. I promise you your life will be better for it. And I promise you your life will be worse if you consume more social media, consume more entertainment, consume more news. I'm not a Luddite. I love technology. I used to work for Apple. I'm an Apple nerd to the hilt. I'm not a technology Luddite, but I promise you your life will be better if you are less connected to digital things.
Well, I was reading an article on this study that someone did, and they took someone who has average phone use, just how we normally use it. It's always in our pocket. It's always on. It's next to our pillow when we go to sleep. It's our alarm when we wake up. And then the first thing we do is take it and we check and see what notifications we have. So they compared.
By the way, real quick, I want you to keep going. But those are a whole set of assumptions. And many of us assume that's how life has to be. And I'm saying that is not how life has to be. Those are all intentional choices that you've made to keep your phone by your pillow, to check it first thing, all of those things. Those are assumptions that if they go unchecked, lead to really unhealthy habits. And we have such an opportunity to say no and actually be quite a bit more intentional. Keep going.
I agree with that. But they compared that with someone who literally did the same thing, except an hour before they went to sleep, they turned their phone off, and they did not have it, like, I don't know if they had it in the same room, but it wasn't by their bed. They turned their phone off an hour before they went to sleep and didn't turn it on until an hour after they woke up. And they measured stress levels, anxiety levels, depression, all of that. And the person who literally, that's 2 hours in the day less. So instead of 24 hours with your phone, it's 22 hours. That's not a big amount of time. That person was substantially happier and substantially, stress, not stress free, but had a lot less stress, had less anxiety, and felt overall just better just from two hours of phone restriction. And I wholeheartedly believe that, Twitter being in my pocket, the fact that I have the world's information in my pocket, and with everyone has led to this new kind of mental health crisis that's been, bubbling up, and all the depression and anxiety. Now, it's not everyone with depression and anxiety is caused by, the phone. It's not a blanket statement, but it has definitely led to a lot more widespread anxiety and depression. And that is, I wholeheartedly believe that the two things are, with the rise of technology also came the rise of stress and anxiety and depression. And, to people like you and me who, when we were younger, yeah, we had technology, but we had AIM Instant Messenger and one family computer with LimeWire that we all shared. And if someone was on the computer, the other person was forced to go outside or clean the room or whatever. So as me and you, people like me and you who, we've seen the not as technical era, but now, we're in the area where literally you're 6 hours away from me right now, and we're having a conversation like we're right next to each other. This was not possible back then. But we can pick that up, and we can understand, oh yeah, as technology rises, so does all these other negative effects. But I feel like it's not as easy for everyone else to pick that up. And so, like you said earlier, a lot of people don't think it's a choice that, you're tied to your phone. I mean, I'm a property manager. If my phone goes off and I don't hear it, that could mean that my building's burning down, or it's flooding or something. It is extremely hard for me to, turn off my phone and kind of leave it somewhere, because I always have that anxiety of like, what if I'm missing something? And for me personally, I have always been like, okay, well, I don't have my phone on me so I can, go on Instagram and Facebook and all that. I have it on me in case, somebody calls me and it's an emergency, because that's my job. And that's one thing I've really struggled with, is like, when do I put the phone down and turn my phone off? But I have done a few things. For a long, long time, I just deleted Facebook off my phone. And I deleted Twitter off my phone. I kept Instagram, but I'm not perfect. I kept Instagram. But just deleting Facebook and Twitter off my phone, it was just like, I was so much less stressed. And it's kind of crazy how just social media in general just kind of affects your mood so much. It's like, when you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is you see what happened in the world overnight and the day before that everyone's reporting about today, it's like it affects your entire day so much. I mean, just before we got on this podcast here, I was sent an article about how one of my favorite musicians just died yesterday. I was just sent that before, and it like killed my mood, and I had to like put my phone away and just kind of drink some coffee and kind of relax and just to get back. But that one article was something that in reality doesn't affect my day-to-day life. I can't do anything about it, and the world is going to go on. And in real black and white, reality, the only thing that's different is I'm not going to. There's going to be no more new music from this man. But on an emotional level, reading that article, it's like, oh yeah, he was like one of my favorite artists. He was really young, and I started thinking like he's really young. He was super joyful, and now he's like gone. He just died yesterday, and it actually like just killed my whole mood for a bit. But it's kind of crazy how that affects our day-to-day lives, and some people don't really understand that it's a choice. You can turn off your phone. And the I think one of the most sneaky things ever that iPhone, or not just iPhones, but smartphones in general did, was put an alarm clock on there, because everyone's just like, why would I buy an alarm clock? I have my phone. But that means you're tied and you can't have your phone. If you need an alarm, you can never turn your phone off overnight. I bought an alarm clock. I have yet to use it. I'm getting there, baby steps. But I have an alarm clock. It's right next to my pillow. That can wake me up, and I just need that kick in the pants to actually switch over to do that and turn off my phone overnight.
Well, do it. You have a whole podcast audience who's going to keep you accountable to that now. So
right, I just said it. I just said it live, so I need to do it. Can you, since we're on the topic, and I think that this is a really important, really simple, important thing that everyone can do. Can you expand a bit on parenting your phone? You kind of you slimmed over it a bit earlier, but I think that is, in today's day and age where everything is so chaotic and stressful, that is a very simple thing that we can all do to kind of make things a little bit better. So can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I have thoughts and ideas around this, but it's also something like I practice. So all these things I'm going to share with you, I actually do in my real life and have done since pre-COVID. And it's been one of the more life-giving things I've ever integrated into my life. And so the big idea is, instead of being ruled by your phone and its demand on you, you give rules to your phone and you demand things of your phone, right? So it's just the inverse, right? So you're not demanded by notifications. You're not being told what to do or where to go or who to talk, whatever. You make rules for your phone. So it comes, for us, at least what we've processed through, it's kind of 5 parts to this right here. The first part is your phone goes to bed before you do. So I mean, that's a real thing. It goes to bed before you do. Just like you would parent a kid. Like we have kids 6, 4, and 3. They all go to bed before we do. We're not going to sleep at 7 p.m. They are. And it's because we're the parents. This is what we do. Secondly, connected to that is it wakes up after you do. So like you were alluding to earlier in that study, have some time phone free before you go to bed and then when you wake up. So start your day without your phone and end your day without your phone. Number 3, and this is connected to these 2, is that it sleeps in a different room than you. Just like my kids do not sleep in my room. They sleep in a different room. My phone sleeps in the kitchen. It literally is plugged in and it's charged in the kitchen. And I bought like a little $5 alarm clock from Target. Or I sometimes will use like a watch or something like that. And it sleeps in a different room than I do. So I'm not tempted to flick and start scrolling first thing or last thing in the day. 4, it has a wake time away from you. So literally so my kids have awake time away from me. So whether it's quiet time, whether it's nap time, if Sherry and I are home with our kids for the day, there's a portion of the day where our kids are somewhere else. They're in the backyard playing, they're in the room taking a nap or having quiet playtime or whatever. In the same way, have a wake time away from your phone. So don't just start and end your day away from your phone, but actually put it in a different room for an hour and read a book or go on a walk or go on a hike or whatever. Have a wake time away from your phone. And number 5 principle here in parenting your phone is your phone does what you tell it to do, not the other way around. So utilize tools like screen time. At least on iPhones, there's some amazing screen time limits you can do. You can say, I'm telling my phone I only want to engage with news for 1 hour a day on my phone. You can actually set that in your settings on your phone. Go to grayscale mode. If you get the endorphin rush every time you pop open your phone, use a grayscale setting on your iPhone and just dumb everything down to black and white and grayscale. And in your brain, it rewires neurons to not get those same endorphin hits from looking at your phone. Turn off notifications so you can look at your phone on your own terms. These are all insanely practical things buried in the settings. But the principle is your phone does what you tell it to do, not the other way around. And I think if you can and one of the things about parenting your phone is. Those are all 5 very doable things to do tonight. So whoever's listening, if you want a better life, parent your phone starting today. Trust me, it will be such a better life for you. And like I said, I love technology. I love tech products. I'm the nerdiest of the nerdy when it comes to tech products, but we have to improve our relationship with technology for our own mental health. And so put it to sleep before you go to sleep. You wake up before it wakes up. Have it sleep in a different room than you. Have some awake time away from your phone, and you give guidelines to your phone. You do what it tells you to do. And so don't be caught in the trap of, well, I have to have my phone on me, so that you end up just scrolling through Facebook for 3 hours a day because you have to have your phone on you for work. No, go into settings and say, I only get 20 minutes of Facebook time today, or delete the app from your phone, or buy yourself a light phone and forward your number to a dumb phone and leave your smartphone at home. Like, there are tons of options out there. We just usually don't have the self-control to actually engage those options.
So actually, the funny thing is I was going to ask you, like, okay, what about the people who their job kind of relies on them answering the phone? Maybe not
just their job rely on them reading news or going on Instagram? Probably not.
Exactly. And so you already answered the question. You're just like, going to, like, I have an iPhone. I can go into screen time and actually limit it. I actually didn't know you could do that. So I learned something here. But that, yeah, I think that is one easy step that's just can be so impactful. And like I told you, before, my compromise with having my phone with me all the time, but hating what I was reading on social media, is just delete the apps off my phone.
Great.
Whenever I'm doing work for a campaign or something, it's like Facebook is kind of like it's part of the campaign tools. And I need to, like, go check stats and all that. But I'm like, if I need to do that, I can wait till I'm behind a computer and actually doing work to go and check that. I don't need to, be hanging out with my friends and all of a sudden check, how many check the insights of an ad that just finished. I can wait till I get home to do that. And one thing that I've been really trying to do for the better part of like 2 years was, if I'm with people, whether one person, multiple people, normally it's one person right now this year. But if I'm with someone, my phone stays in my pocket. And if it buzzes or whatever, I don't worry about it. Unless someone's calling me like 5 times straight, I usually don't worry about it, because I like to be present with the person over my phone. Now, that's one thing that I've just been doing for me, because I'm not, if I'm hanging out with someone and they pull out their phone, I'm not instantly offended. But me personally, I know that if I'm on my phone while I'm with someone, I am not present with that person. I'm not paying attention to what they are saying, what they are doing, or anything. And that's because I can, not all the time, but I can be very single task minded. And so if I'm reading something, an article on Facebook or a status or a tweet or whatever, that means I'm completely ignoring everything else that's going on around me. But
I actually think that's more common. Like, we're bad multitaskers. We're not good at this. Yeah. You can do things, you can do a handful of things awfully, or you can do one thing well. Choose to do one thing well. And what a gift it is for people, for when you're sitting across from a coffee or a beer or whatever, to be fully present with them and to show them the kind of value and dignity and respect and honor of being fully present with them. Like, that's a gift. And then it's a gift that you said you're not offended if someone pulls out the phone. That's beautiful. But I think even that person, as you model a different way, will start to encounter something different as well, and maybe feel a little self-conscious, or have even that check inside themselves of, am I being as present with this person as they are being with me? And I think it's such a gift of value and honor to someone to be fully present with them and to learn to love your do not disturb feature.
I utilize that feature quite a bit, because like I said, unless someone's calling me like 5 times, I usually don't pay attention. But if someone calls and they're on a list of people and they call more than once, it'll push through. I utilize that feature quite a bit. But what's funny is I started that trend because I actually offended somebody else. And didn't realize what I was doing was offensive, but I actually offended someone else, which is when I started that trend. So it was someone who actually both I highly doubt you would remember this person, so I'm not even gonna. But they went to our original church with us, and I run into them randomly. This is years ago, and we start talking, and he's telling me a story, and my phone buzzed, so I pulled out my phone. I had a text, so I started reading it. This guy literally stopped his story and said, "Oh wow," and then walked away. He didn't say, "All right, I'll talk to you later." He didn't say like, "Oh, you looked at," he just walked away. And then I look up and I'm like, what the heck just happened? And then as I thought about it later, I'm like, he was telling me a story. I pulled out my phone, started paying attention to my phone instead of him. He didn't like that at all. He didn't think it was worth his time. He just walked away. And that literally plays in my head all the time because it's just like me. To me, that wasn't offensive, which is why I did it and why I don't get offended if someone else does it. But to him, that was just so, that hit him right in the core. And I don't know what happened to him that day. Maybe someone else ignored him and everyone's been ignoring him all day. And I was just, the next person in a long list of people to ignore him. Maybe he doesn't do that with everyone, but that was just so like eye-opening to me is that one time he just laughed and said, okay, and walked away.
I mean, right or wrong, in that moment, what you communicated was you don't matter as much as whoever just texted me.
Exactly.
And no one likes to be confronted with that. And that's what I'm talking about with value and honoring somebody. Like, yeah, everyone's got different thresholds for being offended or taking things personally or whatever. But if we can lead with showing value and dignity, even if we would not be offended by that same practice, if we can lead with showing people the value of being seen and being heard. I mean, that is what so much of the conversation around racial justice is about, is just being seen and being heard. And if we can afford people the simple value and dignity of being seen and being heard uninterrupted, not interrupting because the language gets offensive, not interrupting because we don't agree, not interrupting because our felt experience is different, but to literally hear someone out uninterrupted is like 90% of the battle. And I'm encouraged that action, even though it was a negative experience, like changed something in you. Like what a gift is when we're confronted with our own dark side. What a gift it is when we're confronted with areas of our life that need to change and we actually respond and change. Like you are a better human because of that moment. Now that sucked and that was embarrassing and maybe you didn't know what to make of that person. And I don't know all the details of that, but like the outcome is that you have grown. You're a better person because of it. And so right or wrong in that moment, it compelled you to live a little bit differently. And I think if we all have the humility to realize we are not perfect and to look at every moment in life, every interaction with someone as an opportunity to grow, even like this year, COVID, election, racial justice, everything about 2020, like what if we saw this as an opportunity to grow and not just as an opportunity, not just as a year where everything was taken away from us or none of our preferred things happened or my vacation got canceled. Everyone's vacation got canceled. Like what if instead we looked at this year as an opportunity to grow and to be different and to learn how to thrive in all kinds of different circumstances? Like those are the things that make us more resilient and make us better people, like more well-rounded people, more mature, healthy, self-aware, present people, is to see those moments where maybe something unchecked or even unconscious goes checked and we go, oh, I don't like the way that just went down. What do I do about that? And instead of saying, well, they're wrong, they're silly, they must have like taken something personally. No. Don't point the finger. Like turn it back to you and say like, okay, well, how can I in this moment grow to be a better person? How can I grow in my empathy? How can I grow in my being present with people? How can I grow in my love and affection for and giving value for people that are around me? And I think that's a really beautiful thing. I think that's no one's perfect. We shouldn't be so, our pride should not be so damaged when we get called out that we shouldn't be able to say like, you're right, I actually do need to grow in this area. That happens to me all the time. I'm a really, I don't know, I'm a version of a leader who can be really loud, have big vision, move people forward, and I need people in my life who will call me on my stuff. And I know that when I respond in defensiveness or when I brush it off, I'm actually functioning in unhealth in those moments. But when I actually take what they say, even if it's wrong, even if it comes from a bad place or a lack of understanding, whatever it is, I have to take that feedback and eat it, because I know I will be better for having processed it and looking at my own shadow side and trying to grow.
Well, something with that is, if someone were to come to me with like a criticism of me, or a constructive criticism or whatever, and let's say it is from a bad place or from like a bad intentions or something, they're saying it for a reason. And they're not just going and saying something random. They're saying it for a reason. Even if it's coming from a bad place, there's a reason that those words are being said. And they may not be conveying the reason, but there's still an underlying reason there. And finding out what that is, and figuring it out and trying to fix that reason can be really important. A lot of
What's the worst that happens in those moments? It's you walk away going, that's not true. I know that about myself. The people around me know that about me. That's not true. Okay, brush it off, move on. That's the worst that happens if we don't take it personally, right?
Yeah.
The best thing that happens is we go like, oh man, they caught a blind spot of mine. I have no idea. Or maybe it uncovered something we've been trying to hide. And we go like, man, this is actually a problem in my life, something that needs to be dealt with. Like, what a gift it was that they had the courage, that maybe they had enough love for you to actually confront you face to face and to say, this is where I think you should grow. Now, would it be done? Was it probably done the best way? Probably not. Like, we all make mistakes here, but like, man, if they had the courage or the gall to actually say something, take it. And if it's not true and the people around you affirm that's not true, then move on. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, that's the worst that happens. But the best that happens is you see something about yourself you did not see, and you go, wow, I can actually grow. I can learn from this, good or bad, like whatever. There's this moment in the Bible when someone's coming to Paul and saying like, hey, they're slandering you, but they're still talking about Jesus. And he says, I don't care. As long as they're talking about Jesus, that's good enough for me. Like, what if we had that same posture? Like, good, bad, feedback comes our way. What if we just took it all as opportunities to grow and just spat out the stuff that has no meat to it?
What's interesting about working at a church is normally in a normal workplace, if your boss comes to talk to you and they want to point out a flaw in something, it's about your work behavior, like your work itself, the quality, your performance, your output, whatever. When you work at a church, they will come to you and be like, hey, your personality, this and that. And they will dive into your personal life and how you act as like a person, not just as a worker. Of course, I work at a church that has quite a few employees and staff and all that. And so it does have a bit more the corporate side, but it was really interesting when my boss came to me one day and was just like, hey, I think you are a little bit too aggressive with people on Facebook. I noticed, something you posted, and the way you were responding was just too aggressive. I think you should be showing more love and understanding to these people, and just less aggression, because you just come off very defensive and aggressive with them. And I think and that would never really happen at in a different type of workplace. I mean, there are some workplaces that will fire you, for what your social media behavior is, but that particular instance is not something that would happen if I worked at Cisco or if I worked at Apple or something like that. Can't say it definitely wouldn't happen, but most likely wouldn't. And with how I am, my initial reaction is just like, oh, well, what do you know? What do you know? But one thing that I've been really trying to work on is what I said earlier. If someone's coming to you with a criticism or a critique, even if you think that it's for the wrong reasons or whatever, there's a reason why they're saying it. And what I've been trying to do is I kind of, like you said, eat the criticism, and figure out if there's merit to it or not. Figure out if they really just are disconnected from the situation, or if they're connected even in the wrong way and they tell you something with bad intentions or from a false pretense or whatever, but if there's merit to it. And that's what I've been trying to do. With the people I've been talking to, going back to a previous point that you said, with 2020 taking it as a year to grow, me and my circle of people who we kind of talk about how we're doing and emotional support and all that stuff, we all said the exact same thing, and it was just like, we are not as good at being alone as we thought we were. And it's really important to be able to be alone. And we've all kind of been trying really hard to work on that. It's like, are we okay with being alone? Like, maybe you're a single man who's, not married or anything, and you're alone in that aspect. But maybe you're like actually physically alone, like you live alone and you're sheltering at home, and it's just you, maybe a pet. And so we've all been trying to kind of work on being alone and being okay with that, and seeing the positives of being alone. So we've been talking for kind of a while here. That's why, I kind of love these podcasts, and that's why I'm so excited you were on, because I feel like whenever we talk, there's not enough time to kind of get everything out on the table. But I'm gonna give you one last chance to kind of respond to anything I said if you want to, and then we can wrap this up.
Yeah. No, that's good. And oh man, one last opportunity to wrap this up. I don't know what to say. I don't quite know who watches or who listens to this, but yeah, maybe I'll make a couple of comments.
There you go.
Whoever's watching or listening, you are valuable. You're valued. You matter. Whatever your voice is, whatever your felt experiences is, you mattered. You're seen. You're known. Even if you are like Tim was saying, kind of practicing isolation and on your own, you're not alone. This year is the greatest invitation in the world to grow, to use hard things in life, to become a better person, to thrive, to mature. Control is an illusion. And this is an amazing year to understand the fact that our control over things that happen in life are nil to none, and embrace limitations. Like, there are things you can do in this season that you never would have been able to do or would have been open to doing, but now you can, and you are. And there is such a beauty in embracing limitations and seeing this as opportunistic. And so, yeah, I don't know if there are any other things worth touching on. I'll probably, like, one other last thing is I very much am in process. I think this is and I hope this is helpful to anyone who's watching or listening. This is a raw, unprocessed conversation. I have nothing figured out. I have no book coming out. I'm not the authority on anything. I'm probably doing 100 things wrong in this season. But I've so loved actually what this year has been for my family, because we've embraced some of these resistant practices of not being overwhelmed by the world around us. I'm so deeply encouraged by our church community here, who's stepped into the season with such a grace and flexibility and an adventurousness to reimagine what could be. And I think in that, honestly, anything good that has come out has been just God's grace in my life, and anything that's not been great or too harsh, it's just me that still needs to be refined. And so I hope it's useful and helpful. I know the audience is wide reaching. I know this isn't a church podcast, but I hope whomever was listening or watching, like, that this was helpful in some way to them, and that it was worth your time.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much for being on. It's really cool to be on a podcast with my brother. And we both, I'll link your podcast down below here in the description here, but it's kind of interesting because we both have our own separate podcasts, and now we kind of joined on one podcast, and you have two different podcasters talking to each other, and it's always fascinating. So that's why we could probably go on for like another few hours with endless discussion and stuff to talk about. But anyways, thank you so much for being on, everyone. Go check out his stuff down below. I personally listen to his daily podcast quite often. Not every day, but the days that I don't, I catch up the next day on it. But anyways, thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
Much love.